to you that the struggle for freedom and justice in this country began in some kind of a mixed way back in the 1770s. There was this controversy over slavery versus slave versus free. And I won't go through all of that, but you can see that on our milestone chart later on. But out of that came a compromise. And that compromise was essentially that white Anglo-Saxon men and their progeny would basically rule America. And then later on, around 1824, the average common white man got some rights in this country, the right to vote. And of course, Andrew Jackson in 1828 won the presidency on the backs of those white men who were not landed gentry and who were now allowed to vote. Well, while all this was going on, we had propaganda being put out, particularly after 1793, when Eli Whitney and some other folks invented the cotton gin. The propaganda was such that the slaves were happy. Didn't you see the pictures of them? They were happy. Go like it. They did not want to own farms. All they wanted to do was maybe work for us, etc. So Eli Whitney extended slavery with his invention by making cotton the king, the oil, the gold of that time. So you had this controversy, or should I say this cooperation between the lords of the lash, those were the Southerners, with the slaves, and the lords of the loom, with the people in the East who manufactured the cotton goods and sold them in world trade. America became a powerful nation based on King Cotton. And who produced King Cotton? It was produced by the men from Africa who had already perfected ways of growing cotton. And the competition was between American-grown cotton and Indian-grown cotton. But America won out because they had the best. Let's flash forward, though. This whole issue of slavery and whether or not we should have slaves in this country was splitting a large part of this country, and about 100,000 white women in the North joined with some blacks who were leading at that time and a few whites to form the abolitionist movement. We had the antebellum period, and things were still roiling just a little bit in this country between North and South. Then the Republican Party was formed in 1854, roughly, and the first candidate to run and win the presidency was Abraham Lincoln. Well, the Republican Party had been the party that, during those first years, was trying to get us out of slavery and trying to end slavery because they thought it was morally wrong. South Carolina, on April 12, 1961, fired the first shot to start the Civil War. In a matter of a few months, 10 other states joined them. So the war was on the issue of, the South called it states' rights. But the 100,000 white women in the South and others who were in the liberation movement called it a war to end slavery. We ended slavery, we ended the war, and I won't go through all of that, just to say that it ended in 1865. But then in 1876, we had a presidential election between Alfred Tilden of New York and Rutherford B. Hayes from Ohio. And you may hear this again this year, young people. In order to be president, you got to be elected not only by the vote, but by the Electoral College. So South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana withheld their electoral votes. And they went to Tilden and to Hayes and said, now which one of you will call the Union troops out of the South, allow the South to go back to business as usual, and we will then give you our electoral votes? Tilden said no. Hayes said, I want to be president. And he did it. And within less than 60 days, the South was beginning to change. The troops were coming out, you name it, the KKK, that had been organized in 1866, started killing off black men, so forth and so on. However, right after the Civil War, a lot of white churchmen came south to help build colleges, and they came to Atlanta, and they built Atlanta University, Morehouse College, Spelman College, private black colleges. And what they were doing, maybe they weren't aware of it then, but they were training people to become leaders in this struggle. Flashing forward, the lynchings got worse. The NAACP was founded in 1909 by Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, and others. And they started this strategy of filing omnibus lawsuits, or should I say, lawsuits wherein you had a plaintiff who filed for himself or herself and also filing for the class. And that kind of thing was going on from 1909 up until really about 1954, when Brown was decided. But every time we won a battle, it took years to win the battle, and then we won it. That was another 10 or 15 years before we could win another battle. So here we are now. We have all kinds of segregation laws established. It was wrong for black folks to go into white restaurants. It was wrong for black folks to try on shoes downtown. You were paid the lowest amount of money. And in effect, there were no rights that you had that the lowliest white person was bound to respect. So therefore, there came a time when it was clear that the class action lawsuits were not working. Charlie, would you see, could you make that work?
Well, I don't know.
The class action lawsuits were not working. Or should I say, it would have taken us a century for those things, just stop right there. It would have taken us a century for those things to manifest themselves. We found in the readings of historic figures that there is nothing on earth so powerful as an idea whose time has come. And by 1960, young folks like Mr. Black and me, who have been going in the back doors, you name it, we took the position there's something wrong with this system. But we weren't the first ones. The young boys did it up in Greensboro on February the 1st. When we saw that, we came together, and I pulled in Joseph Pierce, Julian Bond, later Charles Black, and others, and we organized the Atlanta Students Movement. And let me just say quickly to you that we organized about 5,000 students. We raised holy heck down there. What you see there is called the Blue Bomb, and let me explain that to you. One of the worst things that could have happened to segregationists was for black folks to learn how to read and write. So when I went to Morehouse, I took economics from Dr. E.B. Williams. And one of the things that I learned from him was about the margin of profit. And I learned that department stores operate on a margin of profit of between 8 and 10%. He also said that if you could find a way to get the least of us, the $5 a day in car fare people like my mother, to buy into anything economically, they make more money. They have more money at their disposal than than the classes. So put that together, we decided to take on the Richards Department Store, which is the largest store in the Southeast. 58% of all goods sold in the South came through Richards Department Store. So we organized this boycott, and I decided in August of 1960 to call my good friend Martin King to ask him to go to jail with us on October the 19th, 1960. And I said, ML, there's a presidential campaign going on. And you wouldn't know what's going on if you looked at the presidential campaign, this war of us battling on lunch counters and what have you. You would know what was going on if you looked at these presidential debates. They're talking about Russia and China and all those kind of things. What about domestic policy? Can I get you to go to jail with us on October the 19th? Because I want to arouse the dozing conscience of this nation, and you were famous from Montgomery. So he agreed to do it. And so on October the 19th, 1960, I took King to jail with me, and I think there's a picture out there in the hall about that. But from that, though, the arrest was internationally known, and that caused the Kennedys, who run for president, to get involved in it. And Richard Nixon also, believe it or not, although you don't hear much about it, Richard Nixon was supposed to also get involved But he asked the big boss, Eisenhower, what do you think about me getting involved in this thing? Eisenhower told him, no, stay out of it. So then Kennedy got involved and finessed the matter, and the black vote was in favor of the Republicans by double digits before October the 19th. After Kennedy got involved, and after his people sent out the blue bomb, they sent out 11 million copies all over America. And the black vote switched from Nixon to Kennedy, and he carried it by 70%. Now, let me just stop right here.
You got the inside of the blue bomb?
Let's see if it's there, Charlie. Yeah. Okay. You see who signed it? It was Martin King's widow, Ralph Abernathy, Martin King's daddy, and of course, Dr. King Jr. had a comment to make. But the bottom line is that that particular blue bomb went out to 11 million people. They changed it. Now, African Americans were voting Republican ever since the time of Reconstruction, except for Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. No, not Lyndon Johnson, and Truman. We switched in 1960, and we're still voting Democrat. But at the same time, though, as we were switching over to the Democratic Party, the Southerners were beginning to go out and take over the Republican Party. We'll talk about it as we go further. But let me just say that we're now in 1960. We caused Richard's department store to lose $10 million during the Christmas holidays. And so when I called for an extension of the boycott on the 1st of February 1961, within 30 days they were prepared to sign an agreement, the only one that's ever been signed in the South by any white power structure to desegregate anything. So we showed the power of the economic dollar that we had by getting the least of us to save their nickels and don't go downtown. I think our slogan was, don't shop downtown, close down your account with segregation, open up your account with freedom. We can still make those changes, and we'll talk about it just a little bit before we go forward. Here, Charles, do you have another one there?
Yeah, another slide there.
Okay, we'll stop here on the blue bomb. We are 1960. Charlie, when you want to take over, tell us about 1960, and we'll go back and forth on that.
Yeah, okay. Am I on? Okay, good. Just to give you a little bit more of my personal story, I was born in Miami, Florida, delivered at home by a midwife. Came to Atlanta to go to Morehouse College. And while there, I edited a newspaper for a couple of years. I was on a debate team. I was president of senior class, and became Lonnie's successor as head of the Atlanta Student Movement. What Lonnie did not mention, a document you'll see on the easel out in the lobby, an appeal for human rights. When the presidents of the colleges and universities in the Atlanta University Center got wind of the fact that we were going to have these protests, some of them tried to stop us from doing it because they felt their obligation to keep us safe, and we were there to study, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody might get hurt, folk might lose their jobs, what have you. And when they were persuaded that we were going to do it anyhow, the president of Atlanta University suggested, if you're going to do that, why don't you at least let folk know why you're doing it? So we came up with this manifesto, an appeal for human rights. And you notice we didn't say civil rights, even there in 1960. We said human rights, because we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable, you heard that one, right? And this document spelled out our grievances in key areas of society, including churches and employment and housing and public facilities, et cetera. And it was published as a full-page ad in the two local newspapers, the morning and evening papers, the Atlanta Constitution and Atlanta Journal, and was picked up by the New York Times and published free as a full-page ad. And I think it was published out here somewhere. Was it LA Times? Nation Magazine, Harvard Crimson, yeah.
Senator Javits of New York had it read into the Congressional Record and also pushed it there.
Right. So it's a historical document that was considered very significant at the time. Now, the governor of Georgia at the time was named Governor Ernest Vandiver. And when he was approached by the news people about this document, he said, well, there's no way that any student in the state of Georgia could have written this. It was extremely well written, and he said that. It must have been written in Moscow, somewhere is what he said. He was stupid. But he was indicting the entire education system of his own state, not realizing that. But in any event, that's how we announced what we were going to do. And then on March 15, 1960, we had sit-ins at 11 different locations, about 200 students, and some of us were arrested. I was arrested alongside Martin Luther King's brother, A.D. Williams King. We were at the same facility, the train station in downtown Atlanta. They sent us some time, had to go out to the farm and wake up at 4:30 in the morning and chop weeds from collard greens growing, and the ladies peel potatoes. So that was kind of the beginning of our movement. Significantly, because of this boycott that Lonnie launched and the effectiveness of it, it was a boycott that lasted a whole year. And folk were ready to go back because it was Easter time and they wanted to buy those little dresses and suits for their kids. So the boycott was about to fall apart. And so we had this huge mass meeting at a church. And the old established black leadership was trying to convince us we accept an agreement that the lunch counters would reopen segregated and they'd desegregate them in the fall if desegregation of the schools went well. Well, we repudiated that. And so we had this big confrontation between the younger folk and the established leadership and the community on our side, essentially. Well, Daddy King was among those on the stage on the established black leadership side. Now remember, he had a son named Martin Jr. Well, Martin Jr. had been asked to stay out of Georgia politics and civil rights stuff. You say you stay in Alabama and other places like that. We got this, you know. And that was his daddy's position and his mama's position and everybody. So when things getting kind of rocky in this mass meeting, Lonnie came up with the idea of calling Martin Jr. and asked him to come to this mass meeting. Well, Martin had just gotten back from Alabama, was in his bed with the flu. And he also did not want to confront his father and had agreed to stay out of this stuff. So Lonnie quoted his father back to him and said, Martin, you can't lead from behind. And so he got up out of his bed, came down to the mass meeting and made the best speech that he ever made, I think. And he quelled the audience, and his key point was that we cannot afford the luxury of disunity.